So Drunvalo, tell me a little bit about your background. I know you started in astrophysics and then you switched to fine arts. So tell me a little bit about that journey from physics to fine arts.
Well, I started in the University of California at Berkeley, California, and I did start in physics and mathematics. In fact, I got all the way to the last quarter, and I realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do in my life, and I switched to fine arts and painting, which seems like a crazy thing to do. I switched from my left brain to my right brain.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very important thing to do when you consider the work that we're talking about here, because this is an integration between the left and the right brain, between physics and art and science and religion.
And in the ancient days, those two things were very connected, weren't they?
Almost all of the ancient philosophies considered that art and science and mathematics and religion were all interrelated.
So tell me a little bit about your spiritual background. What has been some of your spiritual training or experiences that you've had?
Well, my spiritual background is very varied. I began in life as a Catholic, and I went through Catholic schools, and I did the traditional Catholic scene. However, at one point in my life, when I was still young, in my 20s, I completely flipped out of that and went into and became Jewish, to the dismay of my parents. And then at one point I became attracted to Sufism and studied with Hazrat Inayat Khan and Murshid Hassan and many other Sufi teachers. Spent about 11 years in Sufism. And in studying Sufism, I realized that all the world's religions were interrelated in a way that I didn't ever really suspect when you're just in one or the other. And then something happened to me one day. I was actually, from Sufism, I began to study Hinduism, and I was studying meditation with a Hindu teacher exactly as he told me to do it. And something happened that wasn't in the book, sort of. My wife at that time and myself decided we were going to study meditation, and we were very serious, and we sat down in front of a little altar and we began to say the mantras and etc. that we were told to do, and to trying to understand what meditation was about. And one day, just seemingly popped into our experience, these two very tall angels appeared in the room. They were about 10 feet tall. One of them emitted a kind of a Kelly green color, and the other one sort of an ultraviolet light. And they were identical. And the first thing they said was that they were not separate from us, but that they were us. We didn't understand at all what that meant. That didn't mean a thing to us at the time. And slowly, they began to keep appearing 2-3 times a day for many years. And
would they talk to you and give you guidance?
They gave us both information and guidance. And we wrote this all down in a little journal every time so we could remember exactly what it all was. And they began to lead me to different teachers, and it was interesting because they didn't. They would just give me a phone number, and they'd say, "This is somebody whoever it was." Of course, when you get this in meditation, you go, "Well, I wonder if this is really true." Especially the first time I ever did it.
Bet.
And I dialed the phone, and sure enough, it was this person, and they were completely open to me coming, and I would go there and study whatever it was. They led me to about 70 teachers this way, of every kind of religious and spiritual background you can imagine. So I ended up going from Sufism into Hinduism to Tibetan Buddhism to Taoism to everything there is almost. But really the main thread through all of this, something that I never understood when I was a child, when I was little, I guess in my maybe 15 or so years old, this American Indian came to visit us. His name was Good Deer. Juan Concha was his American name. And him and a few other Indians came to visit my sister and my family. And then they came every year for 35 years or 30 years.
What do you think about that, them always coming like that?
I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand it. I just thought they were these friends of my sister's. But later in life, I knew beyond any doubt at all that it was the Indians that actually initiated within me the seeing of these angels and not the Hindu mantras and things that I was saying. I'll just tell you a real quick little story. About 6 months afterwards, the angels told me that I had to go see my sister in California. And I was to go by myself, and I was to spend exactly 3 days and then return. And so I went there, and the Indians happened to be there at that moment, but I didn't mean a thing to me at that moment. And they were there on the first day, and then they left right after that. And so other than that, nothing happened. I was kind of waiting for something to happen, and nothing happened. And so exactly on the third day, at exactly the time when I knew that the appointed time was up, I packed my things in my car, I started my motor, and I was going to drive away. I just got out to give my sister one more hug, and just as I started to leave, she says, "Oh, I forgot, I'm supposed to give you something the next time I see you." And so she went into the other room, and she came back, and she had her hands cupped like this. And she said, the American Indians, this is the Taos Indians I'm talking about, she said they did a ceremony for you in the kiva that they've never done for a white man before, and that it was for you to help you find your way. And then they opened up the hands, and her hand, and in there was a little tiny fetish carved out of stone that the Indians had carved, and it was looked like a little deer, but the deer was made of a stone that on one side was the exact color of one of the angels, and on the other side was the exact color of the other, the green angel. So it was purple on one side and green on the other. And when I saw that, it just instantly I understood. I can't tell you how. I just knew. It was one of the first times when very powerful events began to happen in my life. And so as I was going back to Vancouver, British Columbia, where I was living at the time, and I was up around Washington somewhere, a little doubt came into my mind. I said, "Is that really true? Is it true that I understand that the Indians are really the connection behind what this is about?" And I asked God, I says, "Would you give me a sign?" You know, I don't think I've ever even asked for a sign before, but I did. That's why I said, "Will you give me a sign?" I would say no more than a minute later, I saw something beside the road that caught my eye so much that I had to stop. I backed my car up along the freeway, pulled over the side, got out, and walked over to the fence and looked. And sitting maybe about 25 yards away out in this flat field was maybe 150 or 200 crows, black crows, in an absolute perfect circle, all facing to the center and looking at each other.
Wow.
It looked like somebody had drawn a circle on there, and they were all standing like this. And I just looked at them, and they didn't fly away, and they stood there and I must have looked at them for about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and then they flew away in a bunch. And I walked back to the car, and I said, "Wow, that was a good sign, God." That was a good one.
You had more training with the American Indians and more formally after that? Or?
As the years went by, I began to spend, I had probably more training with the American Indians than anyone else. And since then, I remembered my life with them. I was an American Indian. I was a Taos Indian in my last life, and I know every minute of that life. And they have recognized and told me that this was true.
Did you always have those memories of that lifetime, or did they come to you?
No, I didn't always have those memories. I didn't know any of that until certain times. That's a very complex subject. What some people call a walk-in. I actually walked into this body on April 10th of 1972, and only for about 30 minutes did I remember who I was and where I came from and what that was all about. And then you forget, because the movie of life here is so real that you just forget. It's like, you know, when you're in a movie, sometimes you forget you're in a chair, you're watching.
Yeah.
Well, this one's really real, and you just forget it. And it wasn't until about 3 years later, when one day I just thought I was who I was, and everything was going on. Although I had very interesting experiences going on in my life, I didn't know that I was actually from a different consciousness level. And one day the angels came in and said, "Well, we think you are ready to remember." And I just said, "Remember what?" And they said, "Lay down." And I laid down, and my mind opened, is all I could say. And for 2 weeks, I barely moved off the bed, and I was remembering everything, and like fast forward. I could remember now every minute from the time I left a different place, not a different planet, but a different way of being than here, a different consciousness, to the moment that I sit here. I can remember the entire process of coming in through here.
So how do you like life here?
I like it a lot, actually.
Good.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's real hard.
One of the things you talked about in the seminar was you spend a lot of time actually talking about history, what happened to the planet Earth, our Earth's history, and that history is something that's very different from what we've been taught in school.
The history that we are given in our history books is just a shadow of the truth, because it's like if there's 10 people sit and watch something happen, some kind of event somewhere, you know, like an accident scene. Each one is going to have a different idea about what happened. In the same way, the people that wrote the history books were generally the people who won the wars, because it was always wars that these things were centered around, generally, pretty much. And so whoever won the war became the person who decided what it was that happened. For example, if Hitler had won World War II, our history books would read real different. We would see us as the bad guys, and it would be totally different. And so we get a one-pointed view of what happened. At this moment, there is a great deal of evidence coming up around the world that is beginning to break down all of our beliefs in how old we think we are, when everything started. And we believe that everything started approximately 3800 BC in Sumeria, and the evidence now has totally destroyed that just cannot be true.
You said that something happened 13,000 years ago that's still affecting us. Can you talk about that?
Well, 13,000 years ago, there was a continent that we have all talked about, but nobody really believes it. Plato described it, nobody really believes it. And it was called Atlantis, and it was really there. And something happened on Atlantis. Actually, it began about 16,000 years ago with a comet that struck the Earth right near Atlantis. And there was something that occurred on Atlantis that the effects of that we are still feeling today. And the problems that we have and everything else were a direct result of what happened at that time. And there was a particular section of Atlantis that were very different than the rest of the people there. And they initiated an experiment based upon what is called the Merkaba, which we'll probably talk about at some point here. And they set up an external Merkaba that went out of control and began to rip the dimensional levels apart. And that Merkaba is still rotating in the Atlantic, which many people consider or call the Bermuda Triangle. It's based on tetrahedral fields, and it's a triangular field that comes out of there. But what happened in that experiment almost caused the Earth to die, meaning not to be able to be used as a star seed, as a base to grow cultures that go on to other levels of consciousness. And many of the ascended masters, and the ascended masters have been around here for a long time, even before Atlantis they have been here. they did everything they could to try to heal the situation, and at one point realized that it was almost unhealable. And the situation in Atlantis began to become, to deteriorate beyond our belief right now. And we think it's getting bad here with our environment now and all this kind of stuff. It was much worse then. It was a lot worse.
Are we still affected by this field that was set in motion this 16,000, 13,000 years ago?
We sure are. And in fact, there have been many experiments by both our governments, the secret governments, the outer governments, and certain ET races that have set up experiments, some that we do not know of and some of them that we do know of, like the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk experiment and other ones that have been used to try to correct that experiment that happened there. Because that experiment is not only affecting Earth, but it is affecting huge areas of space at distances away from us that we can't really understand.
I want to talk a little bit about the Flower of Life, which is the name of this seminar, and you've talked about how this particular geometry has appeared in Egypt, in Turkey, in Greece, in Ireland, and England, all these different places. And what is some of the meanings that are contained in that geometry?
The Flower of Life is an image, like you said, that it has been found all over the planet. It's an image that, without training, without inner training, would look just like 19 circles on a wall and wouldn't seem like anything. But with the proper training, and you can begin to unfold what its true meaning is, which is more than it would be very hard to believe if you were just listening outwardly to something like this, what I'm about to say. But actually contained in that image is the very creation image, a single image of a field through which everything in existence was created through, without exception. All life forms, the very shape of your body, right down to the color of your eyes, all biological life forms, all crystal structures, all mathematical formula, everything in existence, on all levels of existence, were created by a very simple pattern, and that is the image.
It's almost like the DNA of life, you might say, sort of?
Well, it actually created the DNA pattern also. It's more primary than even those types of concepts. In the workshop, we will go into detail to show that to the mind, because that's an important thing. Going back to Atlantis just for a moment, when things began to fall apart on a dimensional level, we at one point, a very specific point in our history, we fell from a very high level of consciousness. We dropped through these dimensional levels, which are consciousness levels, down, 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 from a place that right now we don't even have the ability to imagine where we were at. We were so high. All the way down to this place now called Earth, where we are now, which is the absolute, almost the absolute bottom of the barrel of consciousness, of self-aware consciousness. We think we're the greatest thing around, and we're really the lowest thing around.
You mentioned before this Merkaba, which is many things, but also a breathing process, a style of breathing that you call pranic breathing that you say we used to do 13,000 years ago, and in this fall we lost this ability to breathe this way. And can you tell us a little bit about what this breathing method is and why it's so important for us to learn it?
Well, before we fell, we used to breathe in a way that is real different than now. In this space that I'm holding right here, there is the air and your oxygen and your nitrogen and all the trace elements and everything. There is something else in there that the Hindus call prana. It is the life force energy itself. And these two things are mixed together. However, prana, unlike air, cannot go through walls or into solid lead or something. Prana passes through everything. There is nowhere, even in a void, the prana is everywhere and everything. We used to take the air in through our mouth and our nose, which is into our lungs, but we took the prana in through the top of our head and up through, from below our feet, up through the perineum, through a tube that still today exists through our body.
We still have that now?
It's still there, but it's not being used except in a few highly trained people like certain Tibetan lamas and certain people that understand about this. But the average person walking down the street, this isn't even functioning, though it could be at any moment. When we breathe that way, the prana, as it came down through the top of the head, passed through a particular gland in our body, which is called the pineal gland. Now, the pineal gland, which sits right in the center of that tube as it passes through the body, is an eye. We usually think of it as a gland, but people who have studied this have looked at it and said, gee, this looks just like an eye. I mean, it is. It's round. It's hollow. It has a lens on it that focuses light. It has color receptors inside of it, just like this one. And it's looking up. It's getting the light that comes from above. And it's designed, its purpose is to receive the prana from above and to send that throughout the whole body. When we breathe in that way, then we interpret the one reality in a different way. Or in other words, we see something totally different. And we see ourselves in a totally different light than we do now. Now, that's how we were breathing before, but when we fell, we stopped doing that. And we started taking the prana in through here. The result of that is what is called good and evil consciousness. We are a polarity consciousness. We see everything as black and white, good and evil, female, male. We see ourselves as inside of a body and everything out there as somehow being totally unrelated, which is not the truth. That's an illusion. The truth is that everything is related to everything else, but we don't see that because of the way we breathe. And of course, many other things began to happen. We started eating food, which we never did before, and our body became denser, and we went into a denser level of existence.
Well, you teach this Merkaba breathing in the workshop?
In the workshop, we will, after about 4 days of training, which it takes a long time to be able to understand the whole there's an energy field around the body that is actually 55 feet in diameter. And we need to remember that field. It's a crystalline energy field before we can begin the breathing. But once we get the breathing going and reestablish that flow in you, then very slowly, or perhaps very quickly, depending on you and your past training, you will very quickly begin to perceive the reality in a different way, which will ultimately lead you into an entirely different level of consciousness.
And this is something that anybody can learn? You don't have to be a...
It's easier for some because a lot of people have had a great deal of spiritual training, and not just in this life, but in many lives before. Though everybody is fully capable of doing this. Even people that you would never, people who are insane, sort of, and things like this, still have that capability because God or the Spirit of God is within everyone.
And what's it like?
Once you reestablish the breathing, and you also reestablish something else, which we call the connection with higher self, when these two things are connected again into your essence, your life changes rather dramatically. And you begin to see something that is very, very hard to explain. From my point of view, there's absolutely no difference between you and me, or between me and anyone else, or the walls, or anything else. Everything's alive. Everything's conscious. And there's only one spirit moving through everything. The other way around, the connection back from the reality to you also takes on a new meaning. Like the crows sitting in a circle out there. This is actually you. If it's speaking you, this would be you communicating with you.
Yes.
And the whole thing is alive.
I talked to a number of people who had taken the seminar, and they said that just immediately their whole lives began to change. Things that were old patterns that had been there for a long time just suddenly started shifting. It's almost like a kind of like a personality earthquake.
We exist on many, many, many levels of consciousness. We kind of think that we are this body and that's kind of it, but it isn't the truth. The truth is that we exist on many levels of consciousness.
The other thing that you talked about in teaching people the Merkaba breathing is that it's actually a vehicle of ascension to take people from the third to the fourth dimension. How does that work? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, I guess you'd have to explain a little bit about what it means to go from what third and fourth dimension is.
Mm-hmm.
Third and fourth dimension is a understanding of the realities that is Melchizedek in nature, or is many other higher levels of consciousness see it that way. The American Indians see it as going from the fourth to the fifth world. There's actually no difference between those thoughts. All realities begin from the Great Void. The American Indians see the Great Void as a world, and we count it as zero. But these different dimensional levels are simply different wavelengths of realities. Wavelength is the key to everything. Any physicist will know what I'm talking about. It is the ultimate key to anything that you can discuss or talk about, because everything in this reality is waveform. Mm-hmm. And each one of these worlds that we exist in, like this one, when you look into the heavens and you see your stars, or you go into any point into the atomic atoms, or into something like this room, there is a wavelength that is associated with this. So you could go into why it's this wavelength, and I could explain that, and I will in the workshop, but it's complex. But this world that we call the third dimension has a wavelength of 7.23 centimeters long. It happens to be the distance between your eyes, or the distance across your hand, or the distance from the tip of your nose to the tip of your chin. It's in our bodies all over it's many places. And as you go up, in between each of these dimensional levels, there is voidness, and then a new reality. And there is an infinite number of them, or at least almost infinite, that's right in this room. They're all here. They are all superimposed of each other.
You can access any one of them, potentially?
If you know how to do it, it's very easy. Once you know how, you can change your consciousness wavelength. You will literally disappear right out of the room, body and all, and reappear into a new world. And each one of these different dimensional worlds are separated by 90 degrees. This is hard to explain now. For those of you who are aware of UFO phenomena, and you've seen these UFOs streaking across the sky and making a 90-degree turn and then disappearing, the beings on there are all, a UFO is not like an airline where everybody gets in and the airline takes you there. Those people on there link together their consciousness, and they make a very specific change inside of themselves, which happens to be 90 degrees. And when they do this through their breathing and their connection, they make the entire ship disappear and move into the dimensional level that they tune to. And there's a certain tuning process that's done with your breath and with your understanding and all that you are.
Can one person make that shift?
One person can make the shift, and two or more can do it in a very special way. I never believed that we would be doing that on Earth. This training here is only on how one person can make the shift. However, we will probably be discussing the grids at one point, and the information on how two or more can do this is in the grids at this point. And that phenomena, which is a very high level of ascension process, it will more than likely begin to take place here on Earth at some point.
So that's what people are beginning to do in learning this Merkaba, is beginning to learn how to make those shifts from one dimension to another?
Well, in the beginning stages, it's how to connect with higher self, how to realize that this entire reality is just light, and that it's connected intimately to what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and that water can be literally turned into wine, and a lot of other things can take place, which are what the Hindus call the siddhis, the powers, levitation, and a lot of other things. These are simple things that have to be mastered and understood first, and then as time goes on, and in conjunction with your higher self, which will lead you through the steps at the proper rate for you, then at the right moment, a very simple, we will teach 17 breaths, which will lead you into a very specific understanding of the Merkaba, and the 18th breath will be taught to you from your inner self, which will be the one that will teach you how to make this 90-degree turn and literally go into the other dimensional levels.
One of the things you talked about in the workshop is something that's going on Earth right now is affecting us very directly, specifically in terms of men and women, their relationships and the communication between men and women, and how that is kind of going out of sync now. And can you talk a little bit about why that is and how that can be fixed before we all kill each other?
To understand what's going on with men and women, you have to go off the Earth and look at the solar system. The rotation of the planets around the sun determine, and the axis that we are tilted to the sun and the way that we rotate around the sun are all major factors in determining the consciousness that is on the Earth. And in 1950, we began to slowly make a change on cosmic levels that culminated on August 7th of 1972. And in 1972, there was a major explosion, you might say, on the sun that changed the axis of the sun by approximately 16 degrees. And what has now happened is the sun is now rotating in a different plane where the planets are rotating. If the sun was like this, the planets are sitting at about 16 degrees and rotating as though nothing happened. Though they are making orbital changes, they're very small. Because the planets are the feminine aspect of the solar system and the sun is the male aspect, and the male and the female aspect of the environment we live in is out of phase with each other. Mm. So in human terms, what happens is when a male speaks to a female, she literally hears something else. Mm. It isn't exactly, you don't hear what I'm really communicating to you, and when you communicate back to me, I'm hearing something slightly different. We did some experiments when we had a mystery school that was in New Mexico for a while, and we took people who were married or had relationships that had an emotional bond, and when they would get upset over something, we'd sit them down, and we'd have a third person sit there, and we'd say, okay, we'd say the woman was upset to the man, we'd say, put it in one sentence or less why you were upset. Mm-hmm. And she would say something very, very simple. Mm-hmm. You know, she would get it down, I'm mad at you because you take the car every Sunday, you know, and you, whatever it is. And then we say to them, okay, repeat it back word for word. Mm-hmm. He couldn't do it. Mm. He would repeat it back, but it wouldn't be what he said, it would be something else. Right. And we'd say, no, say it exactly the same. And it would sometimes take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 attempts before he could say it word for word. And then he would repeat back to her his side of it, yeah, and she couldn't repeat it to him. And we did this over and over and over, and we began to realize that we knew of the cosmic aspect of what was going on, but we could see clearly what was happening on Earth levels. And so the divorce rate, which prior to 1950, which was when this really started to come in on here, you know, somebody got married then, they were married pretty much for life. Mm-hmm. But by 1972, as these things began to really change on big levels, we're in a place now where it's almost impossible to remain connected. Mm-hmm. And it's a communication problem. Mm-hmm. I'm studying this to the best of my ability in every way I can, mm-hmm, to try to find an answer. And I don't know if there is. It's only anything you do right now is going to be like a Band-Aid. Mm-hmm. Until the reality changes, and it will. Mm-hmm. There will come a time very, very soon when the axis of the Earth is going to change its relationship to the Earth, and the Earth is going to go into a new orbit around the Sun, and it'll take many years for it to come into stability again. But when just the shifting of the axis that alone will help much of the communication problem. Mm. But it's going to be a while before we will be able to easily be together, mm-hmm, as one, like we used to be. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the whales and the dolphins and how you talk about the dolphin brain, what the dolphin brain is like and why we're so connected with them.
Most people on Earth see the whales and the dolphins as just being these interesting animals in the water, and they're not really aware of the incredible significance that they have for us. It would be real hard for me in a short period of time to truly put across everything that I know about this to you. Just to give you an example, speech begins when a brain reaches approximately 1,000 grams. This is science has figured this out. Approximately 1,000 grams, which is about 2 years old. When a human being reaches about 2 years old, suddenly they can communicate because their brain size has reached this critical mass size. The largest other animal besides the whales and the dolphins, the apes, when they're fully mature, their brain is about 750 grams. And so someday, when they reach 1,000 grams, they should be able to start communicating like we are right now. The dolphins reached 1,000 grams in their evolution. We don't know for sure, but approximately 30 million years ago. 30 million years ago, the dolphins reached and were able to communicate on a level, at least as a child does as a 2-year-old. And at the moment, an adult human being has a brain approximately 1,550 grams. That's, that's an adult human. An adult dolphin has about 1,850 grams. They have a much bigger brain than ours. They have areas in the brain that we don't even know what it is. We don't even know what it does or what it's for. And the complexity, all I can, without going into a lot of this, we as humans, when we interpret the one reality, we use primarily light, which is this stuff that we're using to film here now. That's where about 90-something% of our communication comes from the reality. And sound is another smaller part of it. These are two little tiny slivers of the electromagnetic spectrum. There's a whole lot more on there in the electromagnetic spectrum. There's brain waves that are coming out, but we're not using that, which you can call telepathy. There is power lines, and there's microwaves, and gamma rays, and on and on, gamma rays, the entire spectrum of all this stuff. This is all communication from the reality. So we're living on these little tiny slivers and blind to the rest of it. The dolphins are able to perceive 100% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So when they perceive the reality, they perceive something so vast, so much farther beyond where we're at, that
so
you
if
can't
we're
even...
looking at something and they're looking at the same thing, they're seeing something very different.
They're seeing something a whole lot different than what we're seeing. A much greater level of communication. Now, they're really important to us because we have a genetic connection to them. Now, this is a very controversial subject, but we will discuss this in detail in the workshop. But we have a relationship to them that is real important. And we also have a relationship to their home planet, which is not on Earth. They actually, though they initially came from outside of this galaxy a long time ago. Now realize the depth of time they've been here. Man's been here 2, 3, 4, 5 million years. I don't even know exactly what it is, but it's not been a long time. The dolphins have been here for 35 to 50 million years. The whales have been here at least 500 million years, all the way back to the very beginning of when civilizations have begun to be formed on here and hold all this vast knowledge. They are ancient beings, and they have came here at that time, 500 million years ago. They were still ancient beings even then, coming from another place. And they initially came into this galaxy and did not come to Earth first, but became to a star that we call Sirius. and specifically to Sirius B, and very specifically to the third planet out from the surface of Sirius B, which is a near solid water planet. They first came there and then discovered something about Sirius A and Sirius B, which is that Sirius A and our sun are gravitationally linked together. We are connected like brother and sister. We move through space together. Even though Sirius A appears to be in a tremendous distance away from us, we are linked together as closely as the sun is, or as the Earth is to the moon. And so we have a fate that is together, and they recognized this a long time ago, and for that reason came to this solar system and came to Earth because of the water that was here. They would have gone to Mars or Venus if there was a lot of water there. In fact, there was water on those planets a long time ago. Both those planets had oceans and were covered. Look very much like this place.
Are the dolphins trying to communicate with us? I know we're trying to talk to them, but...
Definitely. The whales began their communication with us in approximately the early 1950s. We were never able to capture a killer whale, an orca whale, though we tried many times. And the orca whales, in 1 year after making the decision to try to come in closer to us, 6 orca whales just moved up to boats and just sat there, just allowed themselves, didn't even flip a flipper, just allowed themselves to be taken into captivity because they wanted to begin the communication process. And many dolphins have allowed themselves to be taken in also, though there are a few dolphins that actually did not want to be taken in, and it has kind of affected them in a real negative way, but most dolphins have volunteered to make this step.
Let's talk a little bit about sacred geometry, what sacred geometry is. You said that it's a universal language, and you spend some time in the seminar looking at the basic elements of sacred geometry so that we can understand these building blocks of life. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important to your work?
Well, first of all, we will use sacred geometry in the workshop a lot. We'll be using it throughout for almost maybe 3 days. We'll be talking about using that as a language to talk about other things. I'm not going to be there to teach sacred geometry, though that's what happens, though that's not actually my goal or my purpose in all of that. Though the real purpose in the workshop is to discuss ascension and immortality and the conscious moving from one world into another. And in order to do that, there simply are no human words to discuss some of the concepts and ideas that will be brought up. They don't exist. And so in order to do that, I have to go deeply into the person's inner beingness and work with what is called sacred geometry, the images that the creation were created through, and use that as a language to discuss certain concepts and ideas and things, so that a communication can take place.
Is that like in our cellular memory, this information that you're accessing?
It's on cellular levels. It's on even deeper levels than that. It's all the way down to atomic levels and even deeper levels than that.
So the sacred geometry is right there in the atomic levels and deeper?
It's in everything. There is nothing that sacred geometry is not in, without exception.
Do you think that the crop circles are an attempt to communicate with us through some of that language?
Well, my understanding of the crop circles is just, I know very little at this point, and my inner guides have told me that my teaching on what that is about is yet to come. They said I had to go to England first, and I'm going there very soon in July, and perhaps that will be the time when they communicate to me what that is really all about. And what I do know is that it is a very high-level form of sacred geometry that no ordinary human beings could possibly do. when you know this. I mean, there's been people like Doug and whatever these guys, two guys named that said, I did it. We were the ones that did this. Of course, while they were telling that on British television that they were the ones that did it, there was crop circles being formed at that very moment in Canada. The levels of communication and mathematical communication that are coming from these that people are beginning to recognize is would require someone of incredible mathematical and physics background to be able to even understand these, let alone create these things. The one message that has been coming up, at least through the work of Richard Hoagland and a few other people that have distinguished and seen this work, is that the mathematical message that has come forth from at least two or more of these images is a star tetrahedron inscribed in a sphere, which is like a three-dimensional Star of David, is one of the primary energy, electromagnetic energy fields that is around the human body. It terminates one hand length above the head, one hand length below the feet, and that tube we talked about runs through that and connects through that. And it is the primary doorway into the other levels of higher consciousness. And it is the basic key to the reality. And whoever it is that is making these things have described this basic key both third-dimensionally and fourth-dimensionally, mathematically, to a T. And so whoever is doing this is talking about the same things that we're going to be discussing in the workshop. I'll let you know if I ever find out. I don't know yet.
Another thing that you talk about in the seminar are about the Egyptian mystery schools and what was taught in those schools and how they relate to the pyramids and what's really being communicated with the pyramids. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
In the workshop, we will go into one of the Egyptian mystery schools, the Egyptian mystery school of Akhenaten, the Law of One. And we will give the information that has only one time in the last 6,000 years been presented on the earth. This is very important information about it's the right eye of Horus. The left eye of Horus, which the left eye is controlled by the right brain, which is the feminine aspect of us. And that information was given many, many times and still is being presented in many levels of the earth. That's the feminine aspect, the psychic aspect, the sexual energies and the tantras and the emotional body work. But the male aspect, the patterns and the knowledge and the connecting other side of the information that was necessary was only released once and has only been written once in the world, though it is written in its entirety, it's just in the single pattern of the flower of life. But it's so simple that most people can't decipher it. And so we will go into the Egyptian mystery school and how this relates to ascension and their beliefs of it. We will give the exact patterns that were used during that time and how they used the Great Pyramid as a tool for initiation and ascension and also resurrection. And the ideas and that they had behind all that. We in present day time will not be using the system of understanding that they had then, but by understanding their system you can begin to understand yourself more, and so that's why a lot of that is brought up in the schools.
You talk about Thoth, a friend of yours. Can you tell us a little bit about what his influence has been in your life and who he is? I
had no experience in this kind of consciousness, at least not for a very, very, very long time. And so I had no memories of the Earth's history and how this had all occurred here. And so it was very important for me to, first of all, get those memories and to understand that. So the angels were the ones who led me to this person who has lived on Earth for a very long time. He's one of the ascended masters, and though he's not one of the oldest one, he is a pretty old ascended master. He ascended during the early stages of Atlantis, not the earliest stages, but relatively early stages of Atlantis, and went through ascension approximately 52,000 years ago. Now, he has been alive in the same body, continuously, non-stop, without any break or death, for 52,000 years. For that reason, he makes a pretty good teacher. You know, he's been around a long time. He's studied just about everything. Yeah, he was the one that initially said, "As above, so below," because he began to realize that all levels are interconnected. During Atlantis, his name was Chikutet Arlitz Vomalites. Later, when he started, actually a person who worked with him, Ra, started Egypt, and he began to function through the Egyptian schools. He changed his name to Thoth, which is Thoth.
You said that Thoth is one of the people that you got a lot of your information from.
There was about 70 different teachers that have come into my life in various ways. Some of them were in physical form, some of them were not, and various teachers. Thoth has been a big teacher in my life. He's given me much of the information, and I don't know what the percentage is that's out in this workshop, but it is a large percentage. Also, for some people out there, I said his name was Chikutet Arlitz Vomalites, and then it was Thoth during Egypt. It's also the same person as Hermes during the time of Greece. Literally, Thoth started Greece. It says right, Pythagoras, who is given credit for starting Greece, which is the father of modern day science, etc. He says right in his writings that Thoth came to him and took him by the hand and led him under the Great Pyramids, from whence he understood the geometries, which was the geometries of the tetrahedron, from which everything that he learned came from there, that it was in Egypt that he learned this.
You said that Thoth is immortal. What does it mean to be immortal?
Well, immortality is the kind of the first thought of immortality is that means you're going to be able to stay in a body for forever, but that's not immortality. That's a trap, because staying in one body is not desirable. However, what is a definition, or at least a definition from our point of view, what immortality is not having a break in consciousness, so that the consciousness remains intact. Your memories remain intact, continuous, as you move from one level to another, and there not being any break, and that you leave from one level to another at will when you decide to. This is immortality. And so Thoth stayed in this body for 52,000 years. He could have left a long time ago, but any person that reaches a certain level, any spirit that reaches a certain level of understanding of the reality, realizes that there's only one God. There's only one spirit moving through everything, and that there's a reason for the creation of all of this, and that as God moves through these kinds of people that have this understanding, they realize that there is a purpose for staying back, that it is sometimes useful for a certain being not to go on, but rather to remain and to help that aspect of which that kind of person would see that aspect of themselves. And so in Hindu terms it's called the Bodhisattva vow. And so that's what he did. He did a Bodhisattva vow. He stayed here. However, he just left a couple years ago. But even his leaving was compassionate. The leaving was tied into the events of the present day time, which were designed to raise the consciousness of the earth.
About in the workshop about these 83,000 sacred sites around the earth and how they're all connected by sacred geometry. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the beginning of all of that goes back to Atlantis again, when the experiments that took place that began to rip the space-time continuum apart of the earth. It was decided a long time ago that that in order to find a solution for everybody involved in all of this, life wants to find a solution for everybody. It doesn't want to punish the bad guys and just the good guys. Life really wants to find a solution for everything. And so what they decided to do was to create a, what in present day terms would be called a Christ consciousness grid of energy, which is an actual electromagnetic field around the Earth. It's about 60 miles above the Earth. It's around the planet. It's very geometrical in nature. It's based on a dodecahedron. which is made up of 12 pentagonal shapes. They wanted to create this field synthetically or alchemically. They knew that we were going to fall, and so they wanted to create a stepping stone back up to the higher dimensional levels. And so 13,000 years ago when we fell, a little less than that, on a fourth dimensional level, they created a grid of points all over the world. They physically created them on a fourth dimensional level and then went to a very specific spot in Egypt, the size of an atom, which at that time was out about 1 mile away from where the Great Pyramid sits right now. And they made a hole 1 mile into the earth approximately. And that hole happened to be aligned with the axis that the grid, the Christ consciousness grid, would someday be created on. They tuned to the possible grid of the earth, and they then did this. They laid out from there a spiraling, both a logarithmic and a Fibonacci spiral, and placed the Great Pyramids exactly on that spiral. Present-day scientists have discovered this spiraling effect of the Great Pyramids from aerial photography, and have re-found this hole that I'm discussing right now. And from there, there are places all over the earth that are really geomancy. They are nodal points of energy lines that run through the earth. They are the very grid points that are the same ones that are around human beings. And they have slowly, over 13,000 years, people, could be in China, could be in Tibet, could be in Peru, certain tribes would get this inner information that they needed to go to this certain spot and build these certain temples and everything, and they would build them. But they were really just reconstructing what was already there on another dimensional level, bringing it down into the third dimensional level. Until today, we have over 83,000 sacred sites all over the world that are all interconnected by logarithmic or Fibonacci spirals, all mathematically delineated back to this single point in Egypt, and to another point on the other side of the earth called Morea, which is the south pole of the Christ consciousness grid.
And Robert Hoagland has said that this
Richard Hoagland. Yeah.
Has said that this same relationship exists with the pyramids on Mars. Is that true?
What Richard has discovered is that the angles and the lines between the sacred sites on Mars also, just as the crop circles do, mathematically delineate a star tetrahedral field inscribed in a sphere, which again is the key. So even the ancient Martians knew that the key to the reality was the star tetrahedron inscribed in a sphere. Though there is much, much more to that, and a lot that Richard Hoagland has no idea about. And we will discuss all of that in the workshops.
This grid that is around the Earth that was started 13,000 years ago?
A little less.
A little less. Is it, what stage is it in now? What's happening with it?
It was completed on February 4th, 1989.
What happened?
It was completed.
Who did that?
Well, it wasn't any one particular person. It was thousands upon thousands of people over many thousands of years doing all kinds of things to create buildings and chant chants and move crystals around and a lot of things. There was a great fine-tuning that took place in the early 80s up to about it was pretty well culminating in about 1990, 1991, but had been mostly the primary work was completed by February 4th of 1989. If you remember, there were people all over the world, especially Europe and the United States, who just had to go to Peru, to Machu Picchu, to put a crystal there. They didn't know why, but they had to do this. Or they had to go to Sacsayhuaman, they had to go to some place around the world of the Great Pyramids and chant, or usually it was involving crystals, because crystals can hold programming and thoughts, and that can continue on even after the person leaves, and which are means of fine-tuning or changing the geomancy, and by making the change in the earth, make the change around the earth. And so there was a great deal of fine-tuning of these sites that were necessary to get the grid to form a standing wave pattern up there, but it's all there now.
What is the significance for us in the fact that this has been completed?
Without the completion of this, we would be in real trouble, because the level of consciousness that we are on now would ultimately destroy itself. No doubt about it, we would. I mean, we're doing that at the moment. You know, right now, most science gives the Earth no more than about 50 years maximum, and before all life on it would be dead. And this grid was important to get completed because different levels of consciousness must have the grid there before the consciousness can actually happen. That's the first step. Now we have a grid too. Our level of the everyday consciousness that we know, we have a grid up there also. It's just slightly lower than the one that's on there now. It's made up of triangles and squares, and it's a different kind of energy field. Our governments have been aware of this for a long time. They've placed all their military installations all around the world exactly on the nodal point of this grid, or on the spirals that have come off of it. That's very obvious by looking at it. Much of the Cold War that's been going on in the world has been trying to control this grid, because whoever controls that grid controls the consciousness of the planet. But and Russia was the first one to become aware of the Christ consciousness grid, the dodecahedronal field, and that it was being formed up there. They're very real things that can be detected, and they're actually, to be real specific, every single species of life, even if there's just 2 little tiny bugs of one species, and that's all there is in the whole world, they're going to have a grid that stretches around the whole entire planet. And so there are these grids that are geometrically spherical in nature, so they are made up of straight lines, most of them anyway, that extend from an average, this is just an average field of about 60 feet in the Earth, to an average of about 60 miles above the Earth, and they're all interpenetrating each other. If you were to see them from off the Earth, it would just appear as a blue glow coming off the Earth. But these are the biological life fields of the planet, which are reducing at the rate of, what, 30 a minute or something? I don't know. There were, I don't remember the figures on this exactly. I think there were 300 million species in the world at the turn of the century, and now, at the moment, there is only about 150 million. That may be 3 million to 150. I think it's 300 to 150 million. But whatever the number is, it has decreased by one half at this moment. So the consciousness of the Earth is going away. The Earth is becoming an unconscious place very, very rapidly. But on another level of looking at it, that consciousness is simply transforming itself to a 4th dimensional level of the Earth, because there is another world right here on Earth right now where there's a whole lot of life, and it's very conscious, and it's aware of us, though we are not aware of them.
You said some of the Indian tribes had gone to this other dimension.
Many of the Indian tribes left a long time ago. Long time. The Anasazis, for example, left a long time ago. The Mayans set up their fields there a long time ago, and certain other tribes, the Aboriginals, etc., in Australia, have already their places in the 4th dimensional world that have already been set up.
They're here, but they're not here.
They're here and there, both simultaneously. And so what's happening is a species does not, you cannot destroy life. A species simply leaves, and so it has chosen to leave. It doesn't want to be here anymore because it doesn't feel good anymore. And so it leaves here, and it just goes to nothing and reappears in another world. And on another world, all the animals and all the life that we know that are dying everywhere is really just being reborn somewhere else. So we're not losing anything. It's a transformation, a translation is what the Melchizedeks call it.
Let's talk a little bit about the Grays. who they are and what their interest in us is and what's happening with them now. Can you tell us who they are?
Well, the Greys are, they're beings from another, well, it's complex. They exist on many different dimensional levels, not just the third dimensional level, though they do come from planets outside of our system. They are a very vast race that exists in many areas, though most of the Greys that are coming to Earth and influencing Earth are from an area of Orion, specifically the middle star of the belt of Orion, and which is a highly polarized place. And they are little people that are just a little over 4 feet tall, with very large heads and big eyes and gray skin. And they were part of the Lucifer Rebellion, which we will talk about in the workshop. And in the Lucifer Rebellion, Lucifer decided to create an external Merkaba rather than a living field Merkaba that we discuss in there. There's two ways that life can work with or generate these fields. One is the one where you do it through your breathing and through your consciousness, and another one is where you make an external one and you get in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Greys became so involved in this way of being that they slowly they first severed their love connection with God, which was necessary in order to do this, to do what they, from their point of view anyway, from all life. They wanted to become separate. And they ultimately ended up with no emotional body. And so they're mentally, they understand the whole thing. They understand how it all works on all kinds of levels. Emotionally, they don't have any. So they have you might say, a left brain and no right brain. They're just logical. And they have multi-purpose for being here. They are very concerned about the experiment that took place in Atlantis, because much of their problems that are happening are because of what took place there. Even though this appears to exist in deep space relative to us here. However, because of what happened in Atlantis also, which is something that's sort of complex for me to get into, we actually have gray blood in us, small amounts of it. And because of that, life has allowed them to do experiments on here. Now, what the experiment is that they're interested in is that we, as an entire dimensional level, not just the galaxy or solar system or anything, but the entire spectrum of life that's in the third dimension, is about to make a translation into higher levels, which will go through something that you might call the Great Wall. This is hard to explain here, but a very high dimensional level, and they're not capable of doing that, because in order to do that, you must have a living Merkaba field. In other words, you're going to go through the great void of all great voids, and no thing can go through, including their spaceships. And so, in order to go through, you must go through a spirit connected to God with love. And they don't know how to do that anymore. And so they've come here to see if they can make a connection with us and a certain aspect, to join a certain aspect with their genes, with our genes, to create a third race. And maybe through that third race, a certain aspect of them would be able to make it through.
Is this what these abductions were about?
The abductions, yeah. It really began, they did a lot of experimentation. They've been here for a long time. They did big experiments in 1912 and in 1943 with the Philadelphia experiment, which was headed by Tesla, but controlled by their understandings and their technology. And they've done other ones, the Montauk experiment in 1983, and they will do other ones in the future.
The cattle abductions, is that also the Greys? What are those?
It is true that they actually did abduct the cattle. They took them aboard their ships and did high-level laser operations on them. Linda Howe, who worked for ABC, did a movie called Strange Harvest, And if you want to pick that one up and see it, you'll understand what that's all about. When she first started doing that and got all the funding through ABC, she thought it was either the governments or some cults or someone doing this, and she investigated it like a murder. And the deeper she got into this, she began to realize that there's no way that anybody could do this. The level of operations would require thousands and thousands of highly trained physicians to be able to do this. We can barely do the operations that were done on these cows.
What were they doing?
They were removing the breathing apparatus and the sexual organs primarily, because those are the areas they were interested in, the breathing of the cows and in the sexual energy. These were the primary things that they were concerned with. And though there were other things, they would sometimes remove other organs and things out of them.
Did they also take the blood? You said they took all the red bloods.
This was the thing that she, the final clincher that she realized that it couldn't have been us, because there's no technology on Earth that could do this. Many, many, many of the cows, in fact most of them, were found without one single red blood cell in the body. Whoever it was removed every single red blood cell out of the body, leaving not even one. We don't have any technology that can do that. Nowhere. And these abductions or mutilations of the cows were found all over the world, everywhere, even on isolated islands and everywhere. Though they were mostly found on the border between Colorado and New Mexico, because the main underground base, and they had lots of these huge underground bases, was on Dulce, New Mexico. And it was convenient for them to do that there. They were interested in the breathing, by the way, because this breathing I talked about, how we were starting to breathe, taking the prana in through the mouth. All of the animals that we brought into us, that we cultivated, domesticated, began to, by what's called in physics resonance, like if you took a room full of clocks and you got them swinging, the most powerful one will very soon get all the other clocks swinging exactly the same. And so us humans are very powerful breathers. And as we brought these animals into us, the cows and the dogs and the horses and all these other ones, they began to breathe just like we did. And it was for this reason that they began to do the experiments on the cows, because they were the ones that we had the closest link with, because we ingest them as well as have them close to us.
What are they doing now? Are they?
Well, at one point they began to then switch to humans and began to abduct human beings and do experiments on them, primarily sexual experiments. And they took hundreds of thousands of them and did experiments, and then began to take hundreds upon hundreds of thousands, and up into the millions of people, literally take them right off the Earth onto fourth dimensional levels and aboard their ships, and took the sperm from some of the males and the ovums from some of the females and combined it with their sperm and their ovums and put them into the females, and then when the baby was 3 or 4 months old, would take the baby out and bring it onto the ships aboard the fourth dimensional level and raise them in test tube type situations, which is how that's the only way they can reproduce right now. That's their normal way from doing it. They have no ability to procreate in a normal, natural way.
Is this what some of the missing children might be, or some of these?
Many of the children, the hundreds of thousands of children that are just gone, were taken from them, and many, many, many people that are just gone are taken from them. And they have created an entirely new race. And their intention originally was to eliminate all the humans on the Earth and to replace us with this new race. Though it's highly unlikely that that will take place at this point. In fact, there's zero chance.
Why?
Though they will attempt to.
Why is that unlikely?
Well, only because I know what the future is going to be. But they will attempt, and Armageddon is part of what that will all be about. They were forced to leave Earth. They are now set up their bases on Mars, and our governments are aware of this now. Though I can't get into this all now, they are aware that they're there, and our outer governments, not the inner secret governments, which are aware of this a long time ago, but the outer governments and NASA are aware of the situation. and there's, but I will rather discuss this in detail in the workshop.
Okay. the kinds of abductions that we were seeing, I guess it was in the 70s and 80s with people, where people were being abducted, is that going on now, or is it still
Very,
going on?
very little. The Grays are not able to enter into our atmosphere except for very short periods of time. I can't explain this right now, but Earth is making them sick.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is still few isolated experiments that they can do, but the massive experiments that they were able to do before is now no longer possible for them. But it is also not necessary for them, because they have created this race that they needed to create.
Well, what do you think about some of these disaster predictions that have been made? There's a lot of people around talking about earthquakes and natural disasters and pole shifting. Do you have any opinions on that?
First of all, there have been many predictions from a long time ago. People like Edgar Cayce, who was one of the first ones to predict the shifting of the poles, and Nostradamus and other people who have made these predictions. But there have been the events that have happened on the Earth in the last few years, and specifically since the explosion of the sun in August of 1972, have altered the course of events in such a way that predictions are not accurate anymore. There is a new turn of events occurring on the Earth now, the likes of which no one in existence anywhere has ever seen before. This is something that does not fit into any of the patterns that are known by any life on any level of existence at all. It appears as though God is intervening directly on Earth in a unique way, and to create something, whatever God wants to create, that is different than what anyone who has ever who has seen into the future. And so predictions are highly unreliable at this point. For example, Edgar Cayce was almost 100% accurate until 1972, and then he dropped way off. Nostradamus was about 80% accurate until 1972, and then dropped way off. And so were a lot of the predictions from various people who had made these predictions before that time about things that would happen and when the poles would shift and these kinds of things. It doesn't mean a thing anymore. We're in free fall. We're changing at rates and in ways that are impossible by normal ways of thinking, and we can't tell it because we're inside the system. We can't see the incredible speed that evolution is moving at because we're inside the system that's moving. If we were outside the system, we would be in awe at what's happening here on Earth.
Do you think there will be a pole shift?
Yeah, that's almost inevitable. There will be a pole shift, though the kinds of violence that normally are associated with a pole shift, the continents going up and down, and huge tidal waves that are hundreds of feet high, and huge blocks of the entire South Pole moving toward the equator at 1,700 miles an hour, and these kinds of things. This may occur, but because of the nature of the changes that are happening, and because of something that I can't quite explain about who we are becoming and what we are becoming aware about ourselves and our ability to control the reality as a planet, we may find that the environment, even though the poles may shift, may not be nearly as violent as we think, and we may find ourselves, it could possibly actually be a very beautiful experience. That's very possible. My feeling on this is, and this is going to go against what a lot of people think, and that is that there are many people saying, go out and dig holes in the ground, put lots and lots of food in it, and guns and ammunition, and hold on for the worst, because all hell is about to break loose. Really what you're preparing for is that time right before the poles shift, because when the poles shift, we will go through an electromagnetic null zone for about 3.5 days, and then after that time be on a totally different dimensional level of the Earth, whereby anything that's happening on this level won't make any difference. That's preparation prior to the time when all the systems, the social systems, the financial systems, and all these kinds of things break down, which is real normal for them to break down.
Is that why everything's breaking down now? Is that
Yeah,
period?
but I'm talking about a time. It is heading in that direction, but there will come a time, probably, when the breakdown will be complete, and the streets will be wild. And you will be able to see this in the electromagnetic fields of the Earth. The scientists will be able to watch will see the correlation in the magnetic field that'll be directly linked to what's going on in there.
In talking about the pole shifting, what do you recommend to people to do to be prepared to deal with this coming thing?
Well, it doesn't really hurt to prepare on a physical level to get the food and everything else that you may need in an emergency. But that in itself is not going to get you out of into the other higher levels.
You can't eat your way out of this.
There's no way. You got to do it because that implies that if you could just hang on long enough, that when you get to the other side, you'll be able to walk out. And as the governments have found, and especially the secret governments, that just isn't true. We're going through a dimensional consciousness change, and it is going to, though that may help a little tiny bit in the beginning, as we pass through these changes, the only real help is who you are, what your character is, how much your heart is open, and how well you are able to love and to connect with God. And so the most important work is working on your inner self of who you are. This is more important than preparing with food. And in the little bit of time that we have left, this is the area that we suggest that you work with, and we have very specific instructions in the workshop on exactly how to do this.
And will you tell people how to recognize the signs of it coming, or will they know? Or?
We will give what normally occurs, what life has seen on other planets and other places that are similar to this. We could tell you what normally occurs, however, because the situation is so unusual, we cannot tell you what's going to happen. The other thing is that a lot of people are waiting for the poles to shift or waiting for this big change to happen, and their thoughts are so much into the future, there's so much preparation for the future, that is a hindrance in itself. The only place that any kind of true change can take place is here and now at this very moment. And so it's much more important to not be so concerned about when it's going to happen and everything like that, so you know it's going to happen, but to shift your focus back to the present time and to begin to make changes within yourself at this time, because you can't make changes in the future. You can only make them here and now.
Is it even possible that with enough people focusing their consciousness in a different way, that what we expect might happen may not even happen the way we expect it to be?
That's right. It may be something totally unexpected, and at this point I believe that's what's going to happen, that we're going to see something that nobody ever thought was going to occur. And I will go into what I see and occur. And it's not me. This is the ascended masters of the earth and many other levels of consciousness that are associated with the earth. They see something happening that is truly extraordinary and very positive. There's no reason for fear for what's coming up. This is another thing. Many of the people are saying, you look out, this horrible thing is going to happen, it's coming. And yeah, there is a death process occurring, but there's also a birth process occurring that is truly remarkable and very beautiful. And so you can identify with the death process, or you can identify with the birth process. And we suggest you identify with the birth process because what is about to occur, there just is no reason to be afraid. It is really beautiful, and it is, though it's extraordinary, it's well within the realms of who we are to be able to handle these kinds of changes. And when the time comes, each person, wherever they are and whatever they have available to them, will have everything they need and will know exactly what they need to know, and will move forward perfectly. Nobody's going to be forgotten, and no one's going to be left out.
It's not like the old vision of like the good guys will make it and the bad guys will stay behind.
That's an aspect of our consciousness, the polarity consciousness. Polarity consciousness sees everything as good and bad. It sees there being the Great White Brotherhood, and it sees it as being the dark. I'll just say the light and dark, and I don't mean skin color or anything. I'm talking about nature. It sees there being the beings of light and the beings of darkness, and that there's this war going on between them, and the fighting that goes on. But really, there's only one God, and God created all of it, and with purpose and meaning behind all of it.
So God created the dark.
God created everything. There isn't anything that God didn't create on any level whatsoever. And from a higher level of being outside of polarity consciousness, these two forces actually work together. And it has to do with timing. The dark force will come to a consciousness. It could be a person or a planet or a solar system or a galaxy. It'll come to it, and it'll do everything it can to keep it from evolving. And the light force will come in and do everything it can to evolve it. And they appear to be working together. But what they do is their actions have a timing element to it, so that the consciousness either goes up or down, depending what God wishes, whatever is the will of God, at the right moment. It's, it keeps it from going or going up or down until the right moment happens. And it's like in birth, you want a baby to be born at 9 months. You don't want it to be born at 5 months, and you don't want it to be born at 6 years. I mean, you want it to be born at 9 months. And so timing is very important in everything in life. Springtime, when the plants come in, when they go, when the seasons and everything else, everything has its timing. And the dark and the light forces moving together cause the timing of all the events in life to happen at the right time. And in terms of consciousness moving up, the trials, the errors, the temptations, the demons and everything else, and the darkness that happens around them, and the fears that keep people from going up, are very, very important, as well as the revelations and the opening and the good things that happen in life. All these things blend together to form who you are and who I am, that allow us to move at the right moment.
So then we really don't need to be afraid of the dark force or the fear.
At one point in our life, yeah, the fear was important. Mm-hmm. But we're coming to a time when fear is not important, in fact, is not desirable. There will be a time when a letting go of fear and a moving into the higher levels will happen to all of us, and there will be this opening that I could only describe with words that would never be. There's no way to actually describe an experience on something that isn't in our consciousness, but we will come to this stage one time when we will go beyond fear.
But you don't mean by this that there is no difference between light and dark, that if there's still significance as to what choice you make in terms of where you put your energy?
It is important that we strive to reach the highest ideal that we can reach, and to resist the dark and to move into the light. This is our nature. This is our nature of who we are as humans, is to try to make this. I don't mean that you can just go out there and do anything. I don't mean that at all. I just mean that hidden behind all of this is another nature that is beyond what we can really normally talk about in good and evil. But yeah, we still need to strive and to go
Are there
forward.
people who've chosen one path or another?
Yeah, there are. There are people who have decided to work for the dark forces, and in my case, I have decided to work with the Great White Brotherhood of the Earth in order to bring forth the grid, which is their main purpose and function, is to bring in the right brain aspect of the planet.
Is this a critical time on Earth now, with this grid being completed and all these changes that are occurring?
Well, the truly critical time, the time when a lot of higher levels of consciousness of the Earth were very concerned whether or not we would even make it as a planet, we're beyond that. We're now onto a plateau of consciousness that we will definitely make it. In fact, put it another way, we have already made it. Mm-hmm. It's now a matter of living it, though it's hard when you look out into the Earth and see all the stuff going on. It looks like we've made it. It doesn't look like we've made it, with all the problems going on. But on a fourth dimensional level and even higher, the Earth has reached a level that is, you might say, is safe. It's kind of like when a baby reaches a certain level of gestation, then it's okay now.
Mm-hmm.
If it is born now, it'll still make it. And we are in that state. We have made it as a planet. We will make it through. We will survive. And except that it's now looking like we're going to go beyond the expectation of just mere survival. We may go very rapidly into extremely high levels of awareness very rapidly. No one really knows, but it looks like that's what's going to happen.
If you're trained in this Merkaba breathing, will you have a better shot at making it through this?
If you know how to create the living Merkaba field around your body, which is by counter-rotating fields of energy created by your thoughts and your emotions, that creates a disk that extends 55 feet out from your base of your spine around a sphere that actually looks on a computer screen to look just like a flying saucer. It's very interesting. Looks just like one. When you are in the Merkaba, your thoughts and your feelings become thousands of times more powerful than they are now, and you are able to create a magnetic field that will keep your memories intact, so that as you pass through these fields, you become immortal from that definition, and there is no break in your memory. Otherwise, what happens to most people, when the magnetic field collapses, their memories in their mind are erased, and they have to start all over again. And they go back and they take
It's
a big
like
step.
reincarnation. And
Well, it's not exactly reincarnation. Reincarnation is jumping from the same place upward. This is all the way back to beginning. It's kind of like unplugging a computer when you got all your programming in there, you lose it. And so the Merkaba will create...
it's like save on the computer.
Yeah, it's like save. Don't lose it. And you'll be able to move through the dimensional levels without any... You'll remember this, everything that's you now memory, you'll be aware all the way through, and you'll be aware of the other side also.
Can you take someone with you if you're trained in this Merkaba?
If you're trained in certain levels of the Merkaba experience, you can, 2 people can bring approximately 150,000 people with them. Without that particular training, which is not given in this workshop, you're first trained on individual understanding of this, and that can only bring yourself only.
Are you going to later maybe teach the other?
That's up to God. I don't know.
Okay.
The key to the Merkaba is love. This is the key. This is what the Grays can't do it because they don't know what love is. And so the whole key is to be able to open your heart to unconditional love to all life. And as you do that, then the counter-rotating fields will balance against the thoughts and the knowledge and be able to create the living field. Without the love, if you can't open your heart, then you can't proceed. And so, though we give the understanding of all of this, for some people, they may have to go into other training programs to begin to open that aspect of themselves.
What about like the children who are being born now? Why are they coming in, and do they have this training, and do they have this information?
Starting in 1972 also, there were a small group of children that were born on the Earth that became the apex of a huge pyramid that kept growing and growing and growing, that is now encompassing the whole Earth. I can almost say that every single child being born at this moment is a very, very unusual person, a very high interdimensional being from another level of existence that is beyond our ability to communicate who they really are. And there are millions of these children being born every minute all over the planet now. There are millions upon millions upon millions of these children that form this pyramid that at the right moment will awaken as a single body of consciousness. and will affect the whole Earth. Now they already started to awaken in 1985. You can go back to the article of Omni magazine in January of 1985 and see what Omni magazine has discovered about the children of China, and these incredibly psychic children. I mean, there's children in China, and Omni magazine has verified this, that they were able to do things like take a group of them in a room, and Omni magazine assumed that it was all a hoax, that these kids were really psychic like the government said, and they would take like a book and they would just flip through it, rip out a page, crumple it up and stick it under their arm. And all these kids could read every single word on there. They didn't make one single error at all. And the more that they tested them, the more that they realized that this isn't just ordinary psychic ability, it's a flawless, perfect psychic ability. And there were hundreds, and if not thousands of these children. Well, now there's millions upon millions upon millions of them in Earth.
Every country.
All over the world, though they are mostly in China, Japan, United States, Canada, Europe, Russia, and more on the northern aspect than on the southern aspect of the world. And though I'm not real sure, because I haven't followed this lately, if that's now extending in the southern hemisphere and what's going on, but I believe it's now everywhere. There is no more reincarnation going on. This is our last life for everybody. This is it. Most people think, I've been reincarnating for a long, 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 long time. Well, this is it. This is your last time in human form. And though there may be a few exceptions, all the children and all the life coming in now are very high interdimensional beings, and when the time is right, the world is about to see something rather remarkable take place coming from the children of the Earth.
How are we going to get all this information out? How are we going to get this out to the world?
The real way that this will go into the world is through people who live it and make it real. They in turn live it and put it into the grid, from which the people of the world will become aware of it through their internal aspect and through their dreams. And through they will think that it's coming from within themselves, though it's really coming from within themselves as an earth body. However, what I've been directed to do now is to allow this to come out in a video form so that it can be taught by other people around the world. And so we're going to start a facilitator program where people, though it's become impossible for people to see me because I'm booked solid for another year, and there's no way for people can any longer get into a direct living class. So in April of 1993, we videoed a living workshop in Dallas, Texas. I think it was about 52 hours of video of all of this information in great detail. And those videos are now going to be shown by people all around the world who have been to the workshops and who understand what this is about and who have been practicing the meditation, so that people, though they aren't able to come and to see me personally, will be able to see it through these videos.
I think one of the things that I felt in the seminar is that what was happening on an external level, or what was happening on a level of the left brain, it was just a small piece of what was going on. That what was going on was all of the interdimensional work and all the shifting that occurred, and that was really what the workshop was about.
It is. The information that is presented is really the least important aspect of this work. The most important is what takes place between you and your higher self and the dimensional releases and changes that go on. That will go on even if you're in with videos or if you're with me. It won't matter, because it's God that's directing this, and it has nothing to do with me personally. And so if these workshops should be able to function just as well from a video as they do from me sitting there and actually doing it.
You've also said that once a person's memory is activated, they won't need you or any teacher anymore.
No, once the their connection with higher self takes place, which is just them on another level, then at that point, all the guidance that they need during this time and all the times that it will then come, they will no longer need me or teachers like me. They will be able to get their inner guidance from within themselves. And so I'm just a stepping stone to this level, and then after that, they don't need me anymore or anything else. They will be able to know whatever they need to know, and they will know how to access whatever they need to know from within themselves.
All right. What would you say is your purpose? What have you come here to do?
Well, I'm not real important in terms of all of this, except that my main purpose was to simply witness and to watch this so that it goes back to the Melchizedek levels of consciousness, and to just view what's happening here because it's so unusual. But and my second purpose was to remind the earth of the Merkaba so that we could remember what that was, because it is important for us to remember the Merkaba fields so that we can make this translation in a smooth, easy way, because we need that remembrance. It's the key to everything. And on a kind of a personal level, though it also has its cosmic level to it, I'm studying relationships. Though, and those are the only three things that I'm doing. My work in terms of the Merkaba is on one level just beginning, but for me it's closing, and another level of this will be brought forth pretty soon. But that's really all I'm here to do. The children are the ones who are going to make the real changes in the world.
Well, Drunvalo, thank you for this work. Thank you for presenting it to us.
You're welcome. Thank you.